50 years ago, this was nothing. Not a small city, not a struggling town, not even a village worth naming on most maps. Sand, heat, a handful of fishing boats pulled up on a creek that smelled like low tide and diesel. And then, one man decided that wasn't good enough. Not because his people were starving, not because there was a war, not because some outside force was pushing him toward change. He just looked at the sand, looked at a map of the world, and thought, what if everything went through here? His name was Sheikh Rashid bin Saeed Al Maktoum. And what he built, not with oil, which is the detail everyone gets wrong, is arguably the most audacious act of economic engineering in modern history. A city conjured from nothing. A brand manufactured before there was anything to brand. A financial system designed to make the entire world feel like Dubai needed to exist. The problem is, when you build a city on a story, the story has to keep getting bigger. And at some point, you have to ask, what happens when the story runs out? Let's go back to the 1960s, because that's where the trick begins. And it starts with a decision that most leaders would never make. Dubai had oil. Not much, certainly not compared to its neighbor, Abu Dhabi, which was sitting on one of the largest reserves on the planet. Dubai's oil was modest. Economists at the time estimated it would run dry within decades, and Sheikh Rashid knew it. So here's the uncomfortable question he was sitting with. How do you build a legacy on a resource that's already running out before you've even started? Most rulers in that position would have done what everyone else did. Punt the oil, collect the money, build some palaces, and let the next generation worry about what comes after. Rashid did something stranger. He spent the oil money on infrastructure before the city existed to use it. He dredged the Dubai Creek so that bigger ships could come in. He built a port, Port Rashid, that was, at the time, considered almost comically oversized for the amount of trade actually passing through. Critics said he was building a port for a city that didn't exist. He said, build the port and the city will follow. This is the first move in the playbook. Build the infrastructure for the economy you want, not the economy you have. Signal to the world that you are open for business before the business arrives. And it worked. Slowly, then all at once. Traders came, merchants came, re-exporters came. People who would buy goods from one part of the world and ship them to another using Dubai as the middle point. The port filled up. The city grew around the port. Tax revenues went back into more infrastructure. By the time Dubai's oil started declining in the 1980s, the machine was already running on something else.
Now this is where the story gets interesting. Because what Dubai figured out, and what most people still don't fully understand, is that the most valuable thing you can sell isn't a product. It's a jurisdiction. Think about what a jurisdiction actually is. It's a set of rules. Rules about who can own what, who gets taxed on what, who gets access to what courts, what protections, what freedoms. Most countries inherit their jurisdictions the way they inherit their geography. They didn't choose them, they just have them. Dubai chose its jurisdiction the way you'd choose a business strategy. In 1985, they created Jebel Ali Free Zone. You could set up a company there, own it 100% as a foreigner, which was illegal everywhere else in the UAE at the time, pay zero corporate tax, zero import duties, and repatriate all your profits with no restrictions. Zero. Not low, zero. At the time, this was almost radical. Most developing nations were trying to attract foreign investment by offering slightly better terms than their neighbors. Dubai wasn't competing with its neighbors. It was competing with the concept of borders itself. Why do you need a tax haven in the Cayman Islands if Dubai gives you the same financial architecture, plus a real airport, plus a real port, plus political stability, plus a time zone that sits perfectly between Europe and Asia? And then they did it again with the DIFC, the Dubai International Financial Center, launched in 2004, a separate legal jurisdiction inside the city. English common law, independent courts, a financial regulator modeled on the best in the world. You could walk from one part of Dubai into the DIFC and be operating under an entirely different legal system. This is the second move in the playbook. Don't just attract people with low taxes, give them a system they already understand and trust. Reduce the friction of doing business to almost nothing. But here's where the math starts to get uncomfortable. Infrastructure costs money. Jurisdiction building costs money. Branding a city that doesn't exist yet costs money. And by the early 2000s, Dubai was spending on a scale that had left fiscal caution somewhere far behind. Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Rashid's son who had effectively taken over the strategic vision, was not a man who thought small. Under his direction, Dubai launched the Palm Jumeirah, an artificial island built in the shape of a palm tree visible from space, designed purely to increase the city's coastline and sell beachfront property that hadn't existed the day before. Then the World, another set of artificial islands shaped like a map of the globe. Then the Burj Khalifa, still the tallest building on Earth. Then an indoor ski slope in a desert, in a mall. Each project was more absurd than the last, and that was partly the point. The absurdity was the marketing. Every time a journalist wrote an incredulous article about Dubai building something impossible, that article was free advertising read by millions of people who had never considered the city before. Dubai had figured out that spectacle is a form of capital. Every superlative, tallest, largest, most expensive, most audacious, translated into tourism, into real estate demand, into business interest. But spectacle requires escalation. You can't stay interesting by staying the same. You have to keep building the next impossible thing. And that requires debt.
By 2008, Dubai World, the government-linked conglomerate behind most of the major projects, had accumulated somewhere in the range of $59 billion in debt. Let that sit for a moment. This is a city-state, a small one, with a native population of perhaps 200,000 people at the time, carrying nearly $60 billion in debt. Then the global financial crisis hit. Real estate markets collapsed worldwide. Dubai's property prices dropped by more than 50% in some areas. Construction stopped mid-project. Workers went unpaid. The cranes that had become the city's unofficial symbol stood motionless for months. In November 2009, Dubai World asked for a standstill on its debt repayments. Not a default, technically, a standstill, a polite word for, "We cannot pay you right now and we need you to wait." Global markets panicked. There were serious questions about whether the whole Dubai experiment had been a mirage, a story built on leverage that was always going to end this way. And then Abu Dhabi stepped in. Abu Dhabi, the quiet, oil-rich neighbor that had watched Dubai's theatrics with what was probably a mixture of admiration and profound skepticism, provided a $10 billion bailout. Dubai was saved, but at a price that wasn't entirely financial. Here's the uncomfortable truth that rarely makes it into the glossy profiles of Dubai's rise. The city that presents itself as the ultimate expression of free market ambition, of building without limits, of pure meritocratic capitalism, that city was rescued by a government checkbook, a neighboring government's checkbook. The narrative of Dubai is rugged, visionary, almost libertarian in its aesthetic. The reality of Dubai includes a sovereign bailout, political dependency on a federation it sometimes publicly overshadows, and a labor system that built all those impossible towers on the backs of migrant workers who had almost none of the rights the city was busy selling to everyone else. The workers came from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Nepal. At peak construction, they represented more than 90% of the workforce. They lived in labor camps outside the city. Their passports were sometimes held by employers. Their ability to change jobs or leave the country required permission from those same employers under a system called kafala, a word that translates loosely to sponsorship and functions in practice as something more constrictive than that word implies. The ski slope in the mall was built by people who had never seen snow. The world's tallest building was constructed by people who could not afford to live in it. The beachfront that didn't exist was created by people who were not allowed on many of those beaches. This isn't a small footnote. It is, in a sense, the hidden subsidy that made the economics work. When you strip out the cost of labor rights, of worker protections, of the basic infrastructure that workers in other systems would require, the math changes. So where does that leave us today? Dubai has, in many ways, recovered and surpassed its pre-2008 peak. Property prices in some areas hit record highs in 2023 and 2024. Tourism numbers are extraordinary. The city continues to attract wealth from Russia, from China, from Africa, from everywhere that wealth is looking for a place to park that isn't asking too many questions.
The kafala system has been partially reformed. The country launched a tourist visa, a retirement visa, a remote work visa, a golden visa for investors. It is actively trying to expand its native population by making residents more accessible. And yet, the fundamental wager is still the same wager Rashid made in the 1960s. Dubai's value is not in what it produces, it is in what it facilitates. It is a node, a place where things pass through: capital, goods, people, information. The city's survival depends on remaining relevant to those flows, and those flows can change. The geopolitical realignments currently reshaping global trade, the pressure on tax havens from international regulatory bodies, the competition from other cities in the region that have studied Dubai's playbook carefully. None of this is fatal, but none of it is nothing either. Here's the thought I want to leave you with. Sheikh Rashid is often quoted as saying, "My grandfather rode a camel, my father rode a camel, I drive a Mercedes, my son drives a Land Rover, his son will drive a Land Rover, but his son will ride a camel." The line is usually offered as wisdom, a leader humble enough to acknowledge that the arc of history bends back. But there's another way to read it. It's a man who knows exactly what he built, who knows that a city built on narrative, on jurisdiction, on spectacle, on the strategic absence of certain rules, that city requires constant renewal of the story. The moment the story stops being compelling, the capital moves, the tourists go somewhere shinier, the corporations find a friendlier node. Dubai has outrun that gravity for 50 years. It has survived oil depletion, financial crisis, regional instability, and a global pandemic with what can only be described as remarkable continuity. But the question Sheikh Rashid was really asking, the one buried inside that quote about camels, isn't whether Dubai will survive. It's whether any city can permanently escape the weight of what it was built on, and what happens when the sand shifts.
If you made it this far, you already know this channel is not for people who want easy answers. It's for people who want the real ones. Hit subscribe, and every time we publish something new, you'll be the first to know.